Sarah, thank you very much for that warm introduction. For those of you who haven't switched your mobile phones off, please note on the right-hand side of this slide is a Twitter account. So should you wish to turn them to silent or vibrate, do please tweet away the importance of this event. And I think that's the hashtag, isn't it? I think it's @dwell_Sheffield, which is actually the Dwell itself Twitter account. But we're really delighted to support this event, but also on behalf of all members of the advisory group, many of whom are here today, a big congratulations to Sarah, Adam, Federica and the team, Malcolm and the team for putting together a really impressive report. As I said to Adam earlier, in fact, this paper feels like Happy 4. For those of you who don't know the acronym HAPPY, it is something that Lord Best, through the All-Party Parliamentary Group, created and work with Kevin, who's here today as well, looking at housing our ageing population and looking at different positive ideas and innovation to support the sector adapt and change and listen to the voices of an ageing population. Many of you will know that we have just celebrated Older People's Day, so it's timely that this event should take place. You can't hear? Okay. And so really encouraged to be here and to sort of highlight some of the real important findings and also to put them in context in terms of other developments taking place across sort of national, local and regional initiatives. For those of you who don't know about the Housing Learning Improvement Network, we're a regional resource with 10 centres and regional leads working across England and Wales. And we have a comprehensive website that looks at specific issues such as design and an age-friendly communities. And it's a resource for all of you for free. And I hope you very much use that and receive the papers we publish in our weekly and quarterly bulletins. To get into the swing of things, can anybody tell me what this is? It is a bus stop. You've either seen this slide before or you oh, well done. But it's something I believe is in Vancouver, and it comes back to the point that Sarah's make around healthy lifestyles and how to remain fit for ageing, and looking at the type of public spaces that we bump along each other and share stories and make connections with both our immediate environment, with others, and in this case, to move around a city. I just thought it was really important because these are sort of the step changes we need to make in terms of thinking around our age-friendly environments and neighbourhoods, to think about the health and well-being of people, but also to take and challenge some of both the health inequalities, but also the lifestyle and choices that people in later life wish to make about their homes and their communities. And typically, within an English context in particular, we're looking at very much a micro-level approach to thinking about our homes as we age. And we're moving towards thinking about what that might be in relation to our connections with our place of living, our community. But in terms of the scale that we're doing this, we're having to think both in terms of the adaptability of our existing homes, but also the types of new communities that we live in. So here we have a particular scheme, and some of you who follow cricket will know this is right next to Lord's cricket ground. So this is an extra care scheme as it happens, or a scheme for people over 55 being developed in Westminster. And on the right is the Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust village in York. Well, we're looking at how to develop a range of solutions, and that's the type of traditional approach we're thinking about in terms of specialist housing for that ageing population that Sarah highlighted, and the issues that we need to face in our own later life. But look what's happening in America. The type of scale that we're talking about, the types of communities are way off the trajectory probably of the way we're currently thinking. And so I was particularly interested in the report around that co-production and the co-designs about how do you build the capital and build the types of resilience that matter for people in those communities. And I'm not suggesting we're going to go down the route of the types of villages or cities, the mega cities in Phoenix here in Arizona, but is that the type of birth of the new age that we're going to be seeing in terms of the housing for older people and people in later life, in particular all ages indeed, intergenerational housing in the future? I personally hope not, but there's certainly ways to think about some of the learning that can be taken from that type of mass living and see how to apply those at a local and perhaps in an English context. As I said, I just wanted to touch on some of the sort of national policy, and many of you will be familiar with the work of the Centre for Ageing Better. That was predated by a very impressive report called Ready for Ageing, chaired by Lord Filkin. The headline quote was that we're woefully underprepared for an ageing population. But when it looked at particular issues in relation to housing, it highlighted that we are not giving adequate priority to a housing market, whether for rent or for sale, or indeed other forms of tenure mixes, for an ageing population. And in fact, we spent a lot more time thinking about housing for a younger cohort of people, the first-time buyers, rather than what's typically called, I think, Sarah, you've talked about downsizers, but the last-time movers or the last-time buyers. So again, how have we moved on over the last 3 or 4 years in relation to that? Well, we're still not ready for ageing. So are we fit as a society to prepare for this? And are we fit as people either living in these homes or working as professionals to help sort of make that step change I referred to? As I said, we're still not being, as it says here, adequately supported to either adapt our existing homes and people are significantly, many homes are still significantly classified as unfit. So we are still unfit for ageing as well as fit for ageing. And Paul, wherever you are from Foundations here, you could talk a lot about the role of home improvement agencies and others to support people in that type of unfit accommodation. As we're all very familiar, at a national level, we have a significantly ageing population. We have an increase of people with long-term conditions, but we also have many people who live well right up to later life and end-of-life care. But the trajectory, as was reported in the Foresight programme, and Judith, I think, is here, who contributed significantly to that programme, highlights that we need to think a lot more about our homes and our neighbourhoods. So we have, on average, about 750,000 units of specialised housing across the UK, but the majority of people live in ordinary homes, the types of accommodation that you referred to, Sarah, in your opening remarks, and what you saw in that excellent little film directed and edited by Federico and Adam. I think you'd be all over here today. But the reality is we have a significant shortfall of accommodation for older people across the country. And indeed, we also have a poor quality accommodation for a lot of the stock we already have. So we have a real issue to address over the next number of generations, and also to think about what are both the government priorities, but also increasingly at a local level, the devolved priorities within the constraints of existing economic situation to meet those needs. We need to demonstrate the benefits that good quality housing has. And again, that link with health that you highlighted is vital. And again, some research that the HCA and others have done subsequently demonstrate good quality housing has a real dividend to the NHS. And Frontier Economics suggested as much as it could save per person up to £8,000 for good quality homes. So the message we need to get across, it's not just about the bricks and mortar. A paper that LIN published towards the end of last year, earlier this year, talked about we need to think beyond the bricks and mortar and be more about the connectivity and relationships. And it's not about bed blocking the NHS, it's also the fact that we're bed blocking our housing market as well. So again, some of the challenges around how can we free up and create the types of environments that this report so expertly highlights, provide the opportunity for people to make the positive decisions or even to raise awareness about what those choices might be. And access to things like information advocacy and advice are a key part of that as well. So what does the sort of contemporary homes look like? Well, we'll have a number of different housing options to look at different particular locations and communities and things that have been identified here in different parts of Sheffield, for example. But again, I think what's been real telling from this piece of work is that sort of collaborative approach that you referred to and drawing together those strong partnerships, both with local authorities and the provider side, but increasingly and importantly rather with older people themselves. How to look at issues in relation to the care approach as well, to think about the appropriate delivery and support mechanisms, especially within some real strict and tight financial frameworks as well. And I'll touch on that and more in a moment. And also the types of balance we want to look at, both in terms of the dwelling types as well as the type of tenure types as well that older people wish and are available to meet in the future. For those of you working many across London and the South East, you know, there's a higher demand for sale property as opposed to affordable rent, and increasing things like private rented as well. That doesn't work in every area. And again, some of the lessons we may find from here is about what are those suitable types of accommodation. So what is that future housing market going to look like? And again, how do we plan and shape that through our sort of processes and procedures? So some of this, it could be around a better commissioned housing options for older people through more cohesive strategies that link across health and well-being and draw in partners across housing, health and social care. Extra care might in the future become a realistic and a better alternative to residential care, but it could also become the new type of care hotel, enabling other forms of supported housing to provide a wider housing choice and access to care and support as needed, subject to the appropriate revenue streams. And I'll come back to that in a moment. We're seeing an increase in happy style products as well, both in terms of the design of buildings and some of the points referenced in here in terms of the design, as well as the types of participation around looking at a variety of different models around villages and sort of almshouses, co-housing and other sort of collaborative approaches of buildings. So some more community-led approaches. And what's interesting, only this week the government have announced the Home Builders Fund. I don't know if people have seen this. There's £3 billion announcement to sort of kickstart the housing economy. There's a little bit in that talks about community-led approaches, and I'd be really interested to see how we can encourage housing for older people to have a much greater say in sort of co-designing those approaches. But, and there's a big but, how fit are we? You know, the government has said we aren't faced with austerity anymore. We've sort of got rid of Osborne's plan. But we know that there is chronic debt, there's rising homelessness. Local authorities are really struggling to plan and commission care and support. We know there's excessive demands on NHS, both acute and primary care. We know that there are severe problems in terms of supporting people with home care and domiciliary care, creating day opportunities as eligibility criteria tighten up, let alone what the impact will be of things like local housing allowance. And for those of you working closely with the affordable housing market to manage both existing housing for older people as well as future accommodation, whether it's specialised accommodation like extra care housing, but also more importantly, the majority of housing that currently older people occupy in terms of the types of care and support that they receive. We might be moving very rapidly to a new supporting people agenda for those of you who are familiar with that from local authority and the provider side. But equally, our older people themselves have the affordability to pay through what's the future of things like attendance allowance, as well as other access to welfare, non-means tested and means tested welfare benefits. So again, some real challenges ahead, I think. And for those of you who've seen some of the commentary around this, potentially retirement housing, in particular outside London and the South East, having significant issues around the future viability in terms of the rental. So again, that's probably a point for discussion, not that's come through the research, and I think, Sarah, you highlighted that those are some of the economic factors that you didn't touch on, but the implications on how we then develop our communities and the types of housing will be a real issue in terms of future affordability. Now that's the gloomy news. The better news is that there is some really positive working, and many of you are working in those collaborative approaches to look at pioneering ways to work in interoperability together to deliver that health and well-being. The government, supported by trade and professional bodies, have set out a memorandum of understanding to understand how health and housing can lead and forge greater alliances. There are clear action plans and a series of really useful tools to help local health economies build those partnerships. But we need to see how and test those to see if they are really working. There is some money in the system through things like the Better Care Fund to support AIDS adaptations, as many of you will be familiar, and there's also some money available for the capital side through both the HCA and the Department of Health for specialised housing. So again, there's some still pockets of grant and money, as I said, to help do that step change and support the step change that's needed at a local level. But is our housing coming back? Is it unfit for ageing? Well, we know there is a significant cost implication, and I think some of the findings highlight those issues around what are the health and well-being aspects. The cost to the NHS in particular, because of poor housing, is equated by the Building Research Establishment to £1.3 billion a year. We know that a residential care placement can be as much as £28,000, and supporting people better with care at home can sort of release some of those monies for adult social care and health to reinvest in community services. And in many areas across the country, I think there's 10 areas across the country, the government's working with NHS England to develop healthy new towns. And I think they would learn the lessons of this report around the sort of issues in terms of how to create sustainable communities which look at health and well-being, leisure and lifestyle, and look at the types of new places that we want to create. I was talking to somebody earlier about some of this in relation to one of those new towns in Barking and Dagenham, looking very much around developing something called a care city, but taking green principles and healthy lifestyles through that public health interface as a key thing. They, as part of their supplementary planning guidance, have developed an additional paper that looks at how, at a local level, to develop those plans, developers need to look at the improved health and the reduced health inequalities new housing can afford, look at green and natural space, so look at parks, look at the river and other things across Barking and Dagonside, encourage a move towards lifetime neighbourhoods, look at issues like travel and transport, the swings that I showed earlier, and also encourage healthy lifestyles through greater fitness and healthy living, nutrition and diet. So again, there are moves taking place to make that connectivity across health and housing. On a personal level, I was really impressed on a visit to a Professor of Architecture at Cambridge University, who's developed something called the Circadian Principles, looking at the psychology of ageing, as well as looking at the impact of living in a home and how it adapts to your to your senses. And he highlights a number of things about how to live in balance with those senses. And the key things are around how to adapt an accommodation, the type of natural lighting, the spatial awareness within that accommodation as well. And this is just an example of his house. But again, I think it fits in very much in the ethos of that dwell approach as well. So again, something just to refer to should you be interested on the LIN website. But again, I mentioned resilience earlier, and I know Imogen's in the audience somewhere who's done a lot of work on sort of something called the anatomy of resilience. Well, that sort of is a really important thing, I think, in terms of unlocking what can be done in terms of building the sort of momentum that we've got to sort of both talk about the personal resilience that we can create to look at issues affecting our later life, but also the community resources that are available to enable us to both self-care, self-manage or support, but also co-creating what I think are those lifelong neighbourhoods. And again, this piece of work is really pivotal in the participants who've been involved to co-create some of those solutions. So again, a big applause for you. It's something that I have sort of referred to as the collaborage. We need to think much more about ageing as rather than older people. And in particular, look at what I've said of the 5 I's of collaborate, how we involve people, how we enable greater independence, how we design for inclusion, how we look at more integrated approaches. And the thing I think personally, again, is how do we make our homes and our communities inviting to people rather than being a barrier or an exclusion to many people in terms of both their fear and safety, but also how we make a much more welcome approach to the way we design. So those design principles are very much captured in the happy principles, that are the happy reports that Sarah referred to, and I've had the privilege of being involved in. The latest one looks at some positive ideas because actually there are some significant drivers to enable the market to develop. We need better quality. We need to encourage and stimulate the market to better understand how the downsize a market, what the scale of that might well be, as well as making all those links to health and housing that are referred to. So as I said, this is Happy 3. I personally do think this new report is Happy 4, and I look forward to Happy 5 and 6 in future years. But it comes back to, I think, some fundamentals around doing it very much around ourselves, how we, as I said, co-design the accommodation around the sort of like that generational, the resident-led, the community-led approaches. We're already seeing things like co-housing and shared housing and intergenerational accommodation percolating up. We're building more care-ready housing, so it's not about appropriate planned care right at the outset, but it can accommodate and adapt at a later life. And the evidence is it does work. As Sarah said, I worked at the Department of Health for many years. We commissioned the University of Kent, the PSSRU, to evaluate all the extra care schemes that were developed at that time. And they developed something called the Adult Social Care Outcomes Framework. And this looked at key indicators of quality of life measurements and whether older people in particular moving from either their own home or being supported from a placement that previously may have been a residential care home into extra care to see the types of improvements. And I'm sure the rings here are sort of fairly vague for those of you sitting at the back. But the blue ring was in the radar chart is where people moved in at the point of entry, and 6 months and then a year later, the improvements in virtually all areas around their quality of life. Where those rings touch, I'll be perfectly honest, is where things like the catering contracts hadn't been sorted out properly, and so things like meals and nutrition and diet weren't fully. So you can see again how this can be used to support improvement plans around operational issues as well. But drawing sort of to a close, I mean, I think this whole issue around sort of designing for downsize and those age-friendly approaches, we need to really escalate our approach to both lifetime neighbourhoods, but also more age-friendly approaches. It's still, as I said, very much piecemeal and in pockets. We've got about 12 cities in England looking to develop age-friendly communities. We can learn a lot of the lessons from those pictures I showed you in America. Some of the terms they talk about, naturally occurring retirement communities or NORCs, where over 35% of your population are of pensionable age. Well, we're not far off that by 2036 or perhaps 2050, where many of our communities will have, so about 50% of people will be over 55. So we need to think about those issues, the lifetime neighbourhoods, the age-friendly cities, adopting the World Health Organization's criteria, and whether the devolution agenda that I highlighted earlier, if we don't get it from central government, can local government and local government partnerships encourage more co-production with older people to create age-friendly approaches, learning the lessons of cities like Manchester, Newcastle, Sheffield, and others. So again, we need to think that. But we also mustn't forget those people who live in urban and non-urban areas and rural and semi-rural areas, again, who often experience the greatest isolation and loneliness too. So we need to get fitter. This report captures that. We need to be clear about how we do that. There's some really important lessons to be learnt from here. As I said, there are a number of series of useful publications that the LIN has. Adam and I have been talking about how this will become a key thing in the LIN website in the weeks to come. We have a lot of information on particular design issues, but I want to hopefully leave you with a more positive note. The issues facing many of us when we go down the road is that we have a negative image of ageing. Let's celebrate older age, and really let's celebrate Older People's Day this week too. Thank you.